wanted to welcome you all to the Farnsworth Art Museum's digital presentation this time of our Artists on Art series. We are so thrilled to have with us today Dr. William Coleman and our artist, Eric Aho. And Eric has been a really fantastic addition to the Farnsworth Art Museum collection. We recently acquired his work Ice Cut Violet, Kennebec in 2022 as part of the Lynn Drexler Acquisition Fund. And we were thrilled to have it. And it actually reminds us really how important the ice industry has been in Maine historically, but also really representing a way of life. And Eric is an artist who keeps the idea of climate and the natural world close to his art and is constantly reinterpreting it for us. So I think we'll have a fabulous conversation with Eric today. Did also want to mention to you that Eric's works not only are in the Farnsworth Art Museum, but in international collections as well, collections that span throughout the United States, such as the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College, Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Oulu Museum of Finland, and the Shoji Art Museum in Japan. So Eric's work is widely known. And we are joined in conversation today with Dr. William Coleman, PhD, who is our Wyeth Foundation curator and director of the Andrew and Betsy Wyeth Study Center, with locations at the Farnsworth and at Brandywine Museum in Pennsylvania. And Will curates, writes, and teaches on art throughout the United States with particular interest in landscape painting. And Will Coleman was also previously director of collections and exhibitions at the Olana Partnership and Associate Curator of American Art at the Newark Museum of Art. And before we get started on the talk today, I just wanted to mention to you, if you are here in Maine, and you should be for the summer because it is a fabulous summer of programs and parties here at the Farnsworth. We have a lot of exciting things. We have some fantastic exhibitions coming up. Jamie Wyeth's Unsettled is opening in July, just in time for Wyeth Day. Wyeth Day is going to be in partnership with the Strand on July 10th. And tickets are available on the website. And then we also have our Andrew Wyeth exhibition up currently, the Andrew Wyeth focused exhibition Abstract Flash, which examines work in the modern world through the lens of Wyeth, and that is up through September 8th. And as well as the adjoining exhibition of Marsden Hartley, which is right around the corner from where we have Eric's painting hung in the gallery currently. And if you're looking for a party to go to in summer in Maine, and who is not looking for a party to go to in the summer in Maine, we do hope you will join us as a sponsor for our inaugural summer show party and fundraiser, and that is on Friday, July 19th. That starts at 6 p.m. and the dancing goes on throughout until 9 p.m. And we're going to have a cocktail party with live music and food. It'll be a whole lot of fun with dancing and drinks as well. And we all know we like to have a summer party here in Maine. So be sure to click on the events page on our website and sign up for the Summer Show 2024. So that does it for my announcements today, but I really wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And we do hope to see you in Maine this summer, and be sure to reach out to us anytime and be a friend of ours at the Farnsworth. So Will Coleman, I'm going to pass it along to you to introduce Eric for our Artists on Art Talk.
So very happy to be with you all. It's a bit later than usual. Thrilled to have the chance to talk with a valued friend and colleague, Eric Aho, about his work in relation to this current Farnsworth project, Abstract Flash, Unseen Andrew Wyeth. Missed a bit there, but hopefully you've all heard that he was a key thought partner in this project, wrote a really fascinating and insightful essay for the catalog To See Wyeth. It was brought to my attention that this fascinating artist who refuses to sit in any of our boxes around these loose terms, realism and abstraction, had an interesting journey with Andrew Wyeth's work, had traveled to some of the key sites of this creative legacy, and thus might have something interesting to say about this. I was not disappointed. You've heard a bit about his larger global history. I'll just note that he is speaking to us from Sackton's River, Vermont, but he is a deeply connected Maine artist as well, who paints there all the year round. Seasonality will be one of our themes for the day. He's represented by DC Moore Gallery. He's an elected fellow of the National Academy of Design, has been a Fulbright fellow, and has had a really fascinating creative journey. So we're lucky to have him as our artist on art for today. to reflect a bit on his journey. What you see in our title slide there on your screen is a practice that is both indoors and out, that is all year round, that is finding the natural world around us useful but not limiting, and some really rich works that have come out of that. So Eric, again, apologies for being a bit late to join there. Thank you so much for spending a bit of your time with us today. Maybe to dig in, I might take us to an image that you nominated. Can I have the next slide, please? This one, Ice Cutter of 2007, might be a good starting point to talk a bit about some of the things you think about in your work. Could you tell us a bit about this artwork?
Sure. Well, thanks, Will. Thanks for all that. And I was just saying as you were entering that, talking about the exchange between sort of the empirical accumulation of information from working plein air for more than 20 years directly from the subject, and that interchange with works in the studio. During that time, I also worked on large paintings in the studio. But what I tried to do, and it's evident sort of in pieces, at least in this painting, that I tried to bring the indoors outside. I brought the outdoors inside after a session of painting. I would have colors mixed, a palette charged up, 3 or 4 works of various sizes, say over the course of a week. And with that material, I could then work, I could then really jumpstart the large canvas, 80 or 90 inches or so, in the studio. I mean, it was impractical to bring them out, even though I've tried. I mean, you need sand. I mean, they function like sails in the landscape. So that became impractical. And over the years, I had this seamless exchange between the two. And this painting here hopefully represents that seamless exchange, but it also introduces something else. It introduces an element of autobiography, which I had always hoped the painting itself would do, right? But just showing up to a place that's important to to one's life, to a childhood place, or a family haunt or something, it doesn't necessarily make its way into the painting, right? Sometimes it needs to be a little bit more conceptually rigged, right? So I wasn't fully aware of what was happening here yet. I have a finished sauna at the edge of a pond nearby, and it's sort of our Sunday ritual, right? It's where we go, the family, throughout the year, and it's also a place I go to be free of painting, right? I just go there to enjoy the outdoors and the marvelous experience of the sauna. But then, and this is the hole here that is cut in front of sauna. It's intended for the plunge, the bracing plunge following the 200 degrees of the interior of the sauna. Real exchange of contrast, which is an important part of all of these paintings. Anyhow, and there I am sitting at the edge of the sauna, looking into this hole, and I'm thinking, my goodness, why is it? This is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I was really sort of entranced by the greens and the amber colors and the blues and the refracted light, and then that inky dark hole, right? I was just transfixed. Of course, I had seen it for already a dozen years, but I hadn't painted it. And then I saw it one day, and it's like I saw it fresh, I saw it anew, and I saw it as something other than what it was, right? So I couldn't wait I rushed home, and I made this painting from memory, from I mean, it is the ice cut in front of this landscape. Now, the landscape, the top half of the painting, is very much like the work that had been going on for that 20-year period. But yet I I sort of inserted something new into it. And in 2007, I didn't understand what that meant fully, right? Here it's set up like Courbet's Burial at Ornans, right? And we were talking with Gwendolyn earlier about all the books behind me. Well, the books are resources, right? And I have 6 or 8 books about Courbet, and I buy them sometimes. I buy the books sometimes for a single reproduction, like of various quality, of various scale, just to see, because I can't, I'm not in Paris regularly. I can't see that painting. So, you have to rely on reproductions, but mostly I use it as like a as a shock to jumpstart painting, or to kind of correct my direction if I feel like I'm going one way and I want to go another. But I knew that this was attached to something else, and the attachment is weird because the whole process of cutting that ice through is about detaching something, right? So and we can get into this a little bit later with Wyeth about disintegration and integration, how the landscape both forms and then dissolves, both in actuality, but then also in our imaginations. So it took some time before this process became the ice cut series that I'm making now, that's ongoing since 2009 or so.
So some threads in that beyond those that you've highlighted. I hear the word memory as a crucial operating principle in your work, and not wanting to make this all about the artist with whom I spend most of my time, I do hear that as a similar core and underrated, under-recognized principle in the career of this artist we love at the Farnsworth, as we do at the Brandywine Museums. That operation of memory, the inaccuracy or the visionary possibility of memory is a kind of a fundamental here. And I hear you also moving away from that idea of landscape, maybe a genre fraught with baggage and associations of past centuries, and that you found some interesting possibilities in zooming in rather than zooming out. So if we could have the next slide, we'll see what comes of this series, the thrilling work that is on view at the Farnsworth right now. Can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Oh, sure. So, to that point about landscape, while I would set up an easel in the middle of a field, just like 19th century plein air painters, like the Impressionists, right? But I distrusted that idea of the landscape or making pictures of the landscape. I knew that I wanted to create a totality of experience somehow. And it took a long time for me to figure that out. I guess it's fair, even more accurate to say, I haven't figured it out, but I have a better sense of it, right? And it wasn't until, so Ice Cutter was in 2007 or so 2008, 2009, I just took a risk. In fact, my wife, Rachel, said, well, what if you just eliminated everything else, right? And I have to credit her with to a great extent with helping me see this from another perspective, right? She's like, well, it seems to me like you're more interested in this aspect than you are in this. And in fact, I realized, and I had even said to myself, that I was feeling a little tyrannized by the pictorial landscape itself. And this sort of looking down and looking over, sort of tipping the field of vision so that there are no trees, there is no horizon, there's no more of a picture, that I'm making an object, right? I truly made the shift from sort of a representational image to, if you will, something that's like objectively abstract. But in and of itself, I'm not comfortable with abstraction, or rather, I love abstraction, and there's countless painters that I look to just as easily as I look to Corot or Courbet or Monet even, but for my own sake, I've tried to make a painting, right? Like I've willed it, but it hasn't happened. I'm suspicious of it. I need to be rooted in reality. I need some aspect of the object I'm making to have something that's recognizable. And in this case, with the ice cut, the violet Kennebec, I started with the greens and violets of that refraction along the top, and that limey green, which which I looked at in the hole I had cut that year at the edge of the Kennebec. And I saw it. I couldn't, and I couldn't believe it. It was like it was a phenomenon, right? But just as soon as I saw it, it went away and it became sort of a rusty tannic color. And then that went away, and it kept changing, right? And so the painting, as rigid in a way as it is because of its geometry, is hopefully full of changeable moments and changeable possibilities.
That's fascinating to hear, and I'm looking through your eyes at this work again. I spent a lot of time in the galleries, and for any of our visitors who haven't had the chance to go and stand in front of this monumental thing, I really urge you to do so. Maybe you get a little sense of that experience of the evanescent effects of color shifting before your eyes, and you can't quite hold on to. I'm really fascinated by how you talk about having something solid to hold on to, that you have thought about that idea of quote unquote pure abstraction, but found that your work needs that something solid. I don't think anyone here would be surprised to see this work hanging next to a Louise Nevelson upstairs at the Farnsworth, rather than in company with other things that are more overtly recognizable. Be that as it may, that identifiable subject matter, a cut in an icy river, is fundamental to you, even as you produce something that could be at a glance geometric abstraction. So I hear in that again something that makes sense to me when I look back through the abstract watercolors of Andrew Wyeth, where we start from observed realities in the outside world. We start from things you can touch and see and smell, but then end up with these really startling gestural or geometric moments. So I do sense a fellow traveler there.
Well, I'm glad that you point that out about Wyeth's work, because I have this great sense that he really functioned with all the senses, as he was like a tracker out in those fields, or a hunter, even, as I mentioned in my essay. He's he's so much a part of that landscape that he knows its forms under his feet. He knows its smells. He knows its sounds. You just have this sense from his works, and these are not and these aren't urban experiences, right? These are wild experiences. And certainly the pictures he makes in Maine are even more wild, I'd say, than the Chadds Ford pictures. And that's another subset of discussion we can get into as well.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. So we've forced you to start from how you think about Wyeth, but maybe this is also a chance to broaden out and to talk about you as an artist of much broader interest. If we could have the next slide, I think there's a useful symmetry here that you are on view at the Farnsworth right now in good company with an artist whom you've thought a fair bit about, Marsden Hartley. And some of our conversations getting ready for this program have included cameos from Rockwell Kent and John Constable, and all these other fellow travelers in art that is rooted in the natural world, art that is place-based, rooted in slow-looking and careful observation, even as it might depart from outward realities of things in the studio process. And perhaps Marsden Hartley here on the right is a good example. So you'll have to come back this summer and see your work in that company. Both Abstract Flash and Marsden Hartley in Maine, I understand, are on view until September 8th. But there's another Hartley I know that has been of either even greater import to you on the next slide. So we could go along, and I like this image of you also doing your embodied practice, making some of those cuts. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
So this is a community ice cutting event I hosted winter before last in Stoneham, Maine, on Keewaydin Lake. And I just have to refer back to the ice cut Kennebec to say that as much as that's about this sort of balance, if it's even possible to balance this abstraction and realism, the other piece of it is about the making of it and the insertion, if you will, that saw that kind of cuts through the very real veneer of ice. Winter I see as like this veneer, as this like protective coating. And once I cut through that hole, of course, initially for the sauna plunge, but then as I thought about it more and more deeply, I realized I was also recreating my father's childhood experience of harvesting ice during the Great Depression. It actually and poignantly became a sort of a deathbed expression for him. And just in his final hours, he shared the details of cutting ice as a young boy. And it was a sensory experience. It wasn't a story so much. It was the sounds of the saws, the Finnish language being spoken, the cold, the smell of coffee, wet wool, things like that he tried to express as he departed the world. And I puzzled over that for years. And then I found myself amassing these same tools to accomplish this ice cutting. And it was an incredible way to connect with this much older father, who, by the way, was just 3 years younger than Andrew Wyeth. My father was born in 1920, and Wyeth was born in 1917. So, in some ways, I also have a window into that generation that that some of my peers don't have exactly, but the painting is probably one of the most wonderful things in the world. It has incredible largesse. It has broad stretched arms, and when you really engage with it, the world keeps getting bigger. And as I realized, as my ice cutting project came along, I happened to see this Hartley ice hole painting. It was on view. I had seen it, I should say, I had seen it once before at the Wadsworth, Betsy Kornhauser's great show in the 90s. But I think I walked right past it. But I saw it again in New York, and then I saw it 2 or 3 times again at Colby College for the Marston Hartley's Maine exhibition. And there I saw something I hadn't seen before. Of course, I registered that this was an ice cutting operation pictured in the painting in the lower left. But Hartley, who was living nearby, walked past this ice harvesting operation in the morning on his way to Lewiston, presumably, and he saw men at work. And then when he came back in late afternoon, he saw the men had left. They had gone home to their dinners. It's sun setting, and there are just a few remnant blocks of ice on the lake. And Hartley notices the cuts look like a letter H. Now, later in his studio at the Hut, which he had been renting for a couple of seasons, probably like 4 or 5 miles away from this, Hartley is known to have walked like 30 plus miles a day. He must have been incredibly fit, but he fashioned it into an H, right? Which no one had ever talked about before, but I saw and I thought, oh, it's an H. And then on the second or third viewing of this, I noticed very slyly the M in the mountains, and I thought it couldn't be. Hartley's monogram, the M and the H, a lowercase m, and the capital H there in the ice. It couldn't be so obvious. And I thought about it, and I started reading about Hartley, and I began to write about this piece. And in my research, I learned that just 6 weeks prior to making this painting, he had changed his name. He adopted a new name. He dropped his given name of Edmund, and he took his beloved stepmother's name, Marsden, stepmother's surname, Marsden, and became Marsden Hartley. He thought it would sound more, a little more serious, more patriarchal, if you will. He wanted to be taken seriously above anything else. But here he is fashioning a new identity. And in 1908-09, or in that December-January period, he literally signs his name with the landscape. He sees himself as an element of the landscape, the M and the H. And it sent shivers through me just to recognize that. And then some years later, it dawned on me again, as things do, because it's like that. Why not recreate this scene? I mean, so many scholars have believed that this ice picture of Hartley's is set at Keyser Lake nearby. And it's possible, but once you see Albany Mountain in the background of the ice cutting picture here on the right, it's unmistakable. Hartley wouldn't have walked past an ice operation on Keyser Lake. He would have walked past an ice operation, homespun as it was, on Key Waden Lake. And I set out to just show that, right? And also have a lot of fun. I engaged a whole community of people, made wonderful friends. I interviewed people whose parents knew Hartley, and they recalled their parents' stories to me. I mean, that was just wonderful. And Will, you're a scholar. You've interviewed countless people, and when you get close to the source, right, it has to be a thrilling experience. And I added to that. Sorry?
I said, yes, indeed. Yeah, this is a through line for our comments today, but please continue.
Yeah, well, just one more thing, which is all of which to say is I didn't set out to be I was just interested in Hartley like most American painters are interested in Hartley, because Hartley and Fairfield Porter and a few others sort of run through everyone, right? If you live in this country and you're making paintings of the natural world, well, these artists are part of your DNA. And I hadn't expected to become so deeply engaged with Hartley. It all happened by accident, that stumbled upon by curiosity. And very recently, I had the incredible opportunity to sit down and spend time with a man at age 89, a gentleman named Sam Chauncey in New Haven, who spent time with Marsden Hartley in childhood. This was between 1939 and 1943. Sam Chauncey, as a kid, would hang out in Hartley's studio in Korea, Maine. And Sam may be the only, maybe, I can't say for certain, but he may be the only person alive today with a living memory and acquaintance with Marsden Hartley. So that puts Hartley sort of right next to you at the lunch table.
It's incredible. Yeah, you're doing oral history just like we do in archive and museum professions. It's wonderful that you're going to the source, you're going to the sites as we see in this image, and recording these stories through your own work. That's really thrilling, and we should talk about another time where you went to the source, as it were, in our next slide, bringing you a little closer to the Wyeth material that is on view now. Yeah, a trip you took out to some of the key landscapes of Wyeth's work on Southern Island and Allen and Benner Islands in the Gulf of Maine, not so far from the Farnsworth Can you tell us about what you learned, what you were surprised by on this trip that was a key context for this collaboration?
Well, I had explored Wyeth World and Fairfield Porter World and Hartley World all along the coast of Maine, but I hadn't actually. I mean, in terms of Wyeth World, I had this wonderful opportunity to accept an invitation from my friend Timothy Standring, who is then curator at the Denver Art Museum. And Timothy called me and he said he's taking a group of the friends of the museum on a trip, and one of his famous Friends of Timothy trips, he called them, and they were going out to the Wyeth Islands, and would I like to join because I knew the area, although I had never been out to these islands, right? And of course, what an opportunity to see, in situ these houses and the islands and the spaces that Wyeth painted. But what I wasn't expecting, that I was also going to become local color, so to speak, because the individuals on the left were largely from the Midwest, Denver, Chicago, and California. Not a New Englander among them. And only a few of this entire group had spent any time in New England. And, maybe for a day or two, foliage, leaf peeping at some point in, years before. So I had the opportunity to regale them with stories of New England and my own accounts of Maine. Some, lots of questions about the difference between Maine vernacular and Boston vernacular. The way we speak in New England, or some of us speak. And it was good fun. It was good fun for about a week, and I had a chance to meet Jamie Wyeth. I regret never having an opportunity to meet Andrew. It just, I wasn't heading in that direction at that time. And I hadn't probably matured as a painter enough to warrant it. I don't know. But it's wonderful occasions such as this. There are countless others, both large and small, that I've enjoyed and I've had the privilege to enjoy, all owing to painting itself. Like, painting is this wonderfully generous calling card that I put out there in the world.
And let's see some of the painting and drawing that came out of this trip on the next slide. It was great to see not only the bird's eye view, and even some creations by your hand that came out of this visit, including the iconic building that was transported out to Allen Island by Betsy Wyeth herself to serve as a kind of museum of Wyeth's work. So you see that clearly when you take the Monhegan boat line out to remote Monhegan Island, that big white strange building that called to Eric, as it has to so many of us, and the Farnsworth's own Olson House, top left, something very familiar to friends of the Farnsworth, as well as the so-called Orr House, Betsy's home on Benner Island, just across the harbor from the sail off there. So wonderful to see that even back then you were already being inspired to make new work by engaging with this really rich creative legacy of our region. Without further ado, I think we should dive right into some of the works in this exhibition that you were reflecting on in your rich essay. And maybe we could go to the next slide and pop one of those up on the screen. Don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that this is one that you reflected on a bit in the catalog. It's one that I think has been used in a lot of the promotional imaging of this exhibition currently on view. Maybe this is a good moment also to ask you that fraught question about how do you approach the line between realism and abstraction? Is that a relevant category for you or not?
We've danced around this, in the few times we've had on in conversation, and it's often been said of my own work that it resides or lives or somewhere between realism and abstraction, which I find you know, I find those terms useful independently, right? I mean, at least to describe what we're looking at, to say this, if it's realism, it looks like something. If it's abstraction, you know, it doesn't look like something. It looks like something you've never seen before. But you know, but what resides between realism and abstraction, I think, of course, is the painting itself. It is the action, the object, and the wondrousness of it. And I think once you step over that ism, right, the thing that we all stub our toes on, and scholars are always apologizing when they use it, right? And I think because when you have to step outside of that categorization, and when you finally get into the object and you start to accept it and see it, you see that it at least in the, well, to a great extent in this piece, is a great example of how it lives and breathes the way we see things in the world. It comes in and out of clarity. It's both clear and obfuscated. It depicts something, right? Like there are edges of waves, and there's a horizon, but then and there are rocks and so on. So we're oriented to a certain point, but then it's like something we've never quite seen before. And to be certain, it's like something Wyeth has never seen before, because once we get over once we accept and invite how we're seeing the painting, then we can start to imagine, my gosh, what was it like for the artist? And if the painter is connected and attached and driving the work in that honest, fundamental way, as whether this takes 5 minutes or 5 weeks to paint, it lives on with all of that integrity and intention. And it's like it continues to it appears and reappears in front of us. It's a living, breathing thing. And that is something very much apart from either realism or abstraction. I mean, Agnes Martin's paintings, which I just adore, and we will talk about later, they live and breathe, although they only represent themselves, really. They're not pictures of anything. You know, a Fairfield Porter painting, and you know, Fairfield Porter and Andrew Wyeth, you know, are near contemporaries. I think they're separated by just 10 years or so. I'd like to spend a little more time thinking about what they have in common, but there's air and breath and life in these paintings, right? They're not entirely conceptual exercises, and I think you know, and I think it's when, well, there's just so much more to say, but
These are really powerful, important reflections. I like this idea that something of this kind, and we should define our terms. We're talking about this fascinating group of largely untitled and previously unexhibited works on paper by Andrew Wyeth from this family collection. They are these voices crying out from the past with only these Betsy James Wyeth cataloging numbers like M1092. They sometimes result in something that was quote unquote finished. They more often did not. And so we've been wrapping our heads around these things in conjunction with comments that, like Eric's comments just a moment ago, from Wyeth himself, use that visual analogy, the one that gives us our title. My struggle is to preserve that abstract flash like something you caught out of the corner of your eye. Eric is also alluding to how we actually see that this is, in a way, truer to the experience of being on that much depicted coastline than something that crisply delineates the outline of every piece of craggy, salt-encrusted granite. There is something more urgent about painting in this way. So it's a really exciting opportunity we have at the Farnsworth to take these things seriously, to stop at this stage of the creative process and think about the choices, the way of seeing, the way of working that is unfolding before our very eyes in this urgent way, quickly capturing these ideas on paper. We've seen glimpses of Eric's practice at a large scale in oil on linen. Paper is also an aspect of his practice, and we might manage to hear some reflections on the time scale of these different processes there. But I love what you've given us about this work. Let's see another. I'm conscious of time. Maybe we can give ourselves permission to go a little bit beyond after our initial glitchy start. And I should also say, for those in attendance, feel free to enter any questions you might have for the end in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will hope to leave time for some questions. So another of these untitled works previously on exhibit, we have that strange Betsy cataloging number M0652. What do you see in this work, Eric?
Well, Will, you mentioned urgent in the previous, regarding the previous piece. And I also, but urgent also brings to mind emergent, right? Like it's like Wyeth is working out of the activity, the material activity on the paper, and he's responding to it. He's dealing with, he's moving the material around in a way, disintegrating the observed world, and then gradually finding clues for its new or reintegration. So it's disintegration, integration, and a reemergence of this. Here it's a it's a rock and the water, and it's muddy, right? It's an earthen metaphor. Like all of Wyeth's work is about the earth and the place literally like under our feet. I think it's certainly underscored by his choice of minimal color usage and tonality. I think that use of tonality, that incredible nuanced sense of value and structure, that is also related to the observed and the real, but it's very much formed in front of him. I think it's what anchors the sort of emotional resonance of these things. I think it's I think in the same way it works in the same way here as it does in a Rembrandt portrait. It's not so much the color of the gold, around a collar or on a ring or something. It has more to do with just the structure from light to dark, that cadence of light to dark that carries everything. And I certainly see, but in here it's murky, and it's murky and dark, and it's mysterious.
I hope that people will have the experience to stand in front of these works as well, just like Eric's. Even if an object 28 inches wide pales in comparison to one of Eric's 90-inch wide creations, these things are imposing in their own way. It's rare to see a watercolor so large, so heavy, and brutal in a way, with such an austerely limited palette. To we down in Pennsylvania, this still feels relatively colorful because we get the even more severe side of Wyeth's work, where it's all brown and black, the cold, harsh time of the year. So that little bit of green, little bit of yellow is a revelation from the perspective of the southern pole of his practice. But heavy, limited, severe, totally filling up this large sheet of paper with color. And I think we have to take seriously that Wyeth himself is calling himself an, quote, abstractionist, that he is finding that term of his time useful to describe things like this. What were you going to say?
No, well, I just wanted to touch on what you said about scale, because it's of a really large work. I find with my large oil paintings, and I think for a large watercolor such as this, there's a surprising intimacy that happens, whereas sometimes smaller works can feel you know, set at a remove, at a little bit of a distance. There's something about the scale that transports them. And you're right too. Wyeth reveled in the idea of abstraction, right? I mean, he used the term pretty freely, pretty casually, referred to himself as that in a number of interviews. I like, I mean, the abstract flash, of course, reminds me of de Kooning's Slipping Glimpses, right? Which, you know, I'm not sure when, I forget exactly when de Kooning said that, in the 50s sometime, but you can see both terms are related to vision, right? I mean, the flash, that thing that catches your eye, and it's often a peripheral vision, right? It's kind of something that's out of center focus. So it's like the interest is out here, the world is out here, the important stuff is out here. And then gradually it comes into focus. And I think that may allude to some of the process or the, you know, on-site development of these works.
I want to keep us moving here as much as I'd love to just continue to riff with you about these things. I know that you made some really interesting comparisons in your essay. You departed from this work to a rather unexpected comp, and maybe we could just jump right to that next slide. You looked from this to, if we could see that next, a Japanese screen. The next slide, Abigail. Yes. There we go. So tell us about that connection you saw. I should have put these side by side on a single slide, but hopefully people can hold the Wyeth in their mind.
Well, you know, so many of these works in abstract flash in the worksheets and files you shared with me early on were so new to me, and I saw glimpses of paintings that I knew, of course, but these works in themselves were very fresh and new, and I was so excited to see them. And I immediately thought of one of my favorite painters of all time, Aho Yusho. I know very little about him, and I do know that I think it was in the 70s sometime, there was a large important exhibition at the Met, and after that there hasn't been much mention of this Japanese artist. But there's something about and as I write in the catalog, a delicate insistence here that I mean, these are paintings along a Buddhist ideal, right? That space can be formed with just the slightest motion. And that Wyeth, in his winter works and in some of the watery works, achieves that that kind of parallel with the subject through, of course, he's using the aqueous medium of watercolor, so he's already there material in his materiality. He's partway there, but his touch, Wyeth's touch, can be so certain. It's so certain that it's outside of knowledge, right? It's not like he's doing it because it's clever or it looks good. It's doing it because it's a necessary action to take in response to the thing he's seeing. And that's how, in many ways, I summarize these Kaiho Yusho works.
I love that. That's a powerful idea. I'm going to be thinking about those words for a while. We should see your other key comp here before coming to our final images, a bit of a zoom out from the works on the walls of this exhibition. There's another lovely, so we should clarify for the Mainers, these are some of, when you see winter in Wyeth, it means you're looking at Pennsylvania work. The show currently on view there is all Maine goodness, but these Pennsylvania things are reproduced in the catalog. We should note the interesting research discovery you brought to my attention about the Wyeth family's history with wintry industry.
Right. Right. Thank you for reminding me. It related to the ice cutting and ice harvesting industry, which is an American invention from the 1830s, a something from nothing kind of industry. sort of invented by a man named Frederick Tudor. But Frederick Tudor's early partner in this industry was something of an engineer, a machinist named Nathaniel Jarvis Wyeth, a forebear of the Wyeth clan. I'm not sure where he fits in the family tree, but he was an inventor, and he invented and repurposed tools that led ultimately to the huge, very gainly success of the ice industry, right? Which I
was fascinated to
which
see
I
that.
liken to the which I liken to the process of painting and art making in general. But I also see Wyeth as an inventor.
Mm.
And I mentioned that he may have inherited that inventor's gene. I don't even know if he was aware of Nathaniel Jarvis Wyeth, but
I think there's every likelihood from this kind of family obsession with genealogy. I just keep on finding new family trees in the frontispiece of a random book on a totally unconnected topic. There's a lot of interest in how they fit into the story of the United States and European forebears. So there's every likelihood they would have been aware of that. Let's see the work on the next slide that you connected this to, a really fascinating suggestion.
Oh, just before you, well,
okay,
that's fine. But I just want to say that the tools for Wyeth are, of course, his paintbrush and his pencil and his fingers and so on. But the paper is also a primary tool.
Mm-hmm.
Wyeth. And in the winter works, he's at his most sort of Buddhist, if you will, his most reserved. In the paper, then the paper itself is a sheet. It's like a sheet of snow. It's a covering. It's a sheet that he then covers selectively to reveal its brightness. It's a light source, right? I think I make some watercolors. There are people who engage in this more fully and really understand the paper as a light source. A primed canvas doesn't quite do that, right? But I also took that winter painting, and it reminded me of many other winter paintings, but it also reminded me of this very late Agnes Martin painting, which, it's certainly in its tonalities, its reductiveness, its spareness of touch, its aqueous. I mean, this is there's an aqueous quality here. You can see the dripping of that very faint gray in the bands, but it's still, because I love these works so much and I think about them. I can't separate Agnes Martin's story from her works. She grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan. These objects, these paintings remind me of tilled fields and farmers' ledgers. There is one painting that is remarkably similar to the trapezoid in my own ice cuts. And when I saw that for the first time, I was taken aback, and I thought she had to have seen an ice harvesting operation on that farm in the 1920s and 30s in Saskatchewan. Every farm in North America, north of a certain point, the freeze line, would have had ice available to them in that way. And not that these paintings need to be explained or described other beyond their sheer beauty and presence, but I don't like separating the artist from the work. I like to know more about them. I like to weave their personal story into my understanding of what I'm looking at. I'm also willing to forgive, certain missteps to a certain extent, or not, if not forgive them, take them into consideration as you examine the entirety of someone's life and someone's work. But Agnes Martin and Andrew Wyeth, I see as standing sort of back to back in a beautiful symmetry somehow. They couldn't be more different, and yet they share so much in common of touch and sensibility And
I
and
hope that the viewers see that as we go from one to the other. It might be initially startling to go from an Andrew Wyeth to an Agnes Martin, but as we dig deeper into this research story, we learn the extent to which he was deeply fascinated by artists like this one, and was finding a kinship with artists who seem like far opposite poles of the art world. What were you going to say there?
well, they may have known each other. I don't know how they've overlapped in New York, but they are they're only a few years apart in age, and they may have been in New York around the same time.
Yeah. So we should wrap up here. I know you had one interesting reflection on the other famous medium of Wyeth's work. We should quickly pop that next slide up here. Hay ledge, an iconic tempera that is currently in a private collection. We got to get that back on public view again someday. How does this relate to that topic of Wyeth and abstraction?
Well, part of the abstraction that I see in Wyeth is arrived at through material choices, right? We can talk about sort of the earthen, muddy quality of his watercolors, and sort of how he developed a world from that. But another little, sorry, piece of information that I learned, I think it's widely understood, is that when Betsy Wyeth introduced Andrew for the first time to the Olson family in Cushing, the Olsons were living a pretty sorry about that, hard scrabble life, and they were selling eggs from their chickens to make a living. And Wyeth had already started making tempera paintings, and as most will know, tempera is there are many recipes for it, but they all involve egg yolks. And Wyeth had already started making temperas, but he hadn't invested himself fully in the medium until he connected to the Olsons through Betsy. He got to know them, fell in love with that place, became it's like it became subsumed in his imagination. And he used their eggs to make tempera paintings of their home, right? And the other thing that the tempera painting, the tempera material does on that gessoed board, he found, and as I discovered as I looked at them more closely, is that he could replicate the sort of sun-bleached dryness of the clapboards. He could replicate the chalky dryness of the weathered hull of a boat with this material. That he could just through that single cell of the egg connect the place, the thing, and the painting and himself all at once. I mean, the egg yolk then binds, it becomes a glue, and it joins the artist and the place together. And of course, then as we look at it, we become joined with it as well. And I think to me, it's a meaningful shift in his work, and I think its meaningfulness comes from his investment in that material.
I love that, and I wish that we could say the same in Pennsylvania, where the eggs come from the Wawa convenience store down the road, rather than from the very subject he's painting. It's so beautiful when the stuff of the place is embodied in the picture itself. What we can point to is the phenomenon that conservators are pointing out to us all the time: the inclusions, the little seed that got stuck to the watercolor, the bits of grass that got pressed into it, and that is common when he's painting on his lap on the ground. You find those bits and bobs. We should wrap, and I wanted to just ask you one final question, which is, what are you thinking about now? And let's see an image to go along with it, Abby, please.
Well, here's a painting that I thought was rather Wyeth-like, or Wyethian. It's a long tendril of a blackberry branch carving through this winter field, and the field The field in all seasons is the subject of my forthcoming show at DC Moore, Fields and Meadows. The title of the show will be Wild Meadow. It's actually how my Finnish surname translates into English. So in a way, it's a self-portrait, but I think that the paintings that I'm showing reflect a shared biography that that we may all take part in.
Mhm.
In that
Can we
experience.
see a work from that series on the next sleeve, the Wild Meadow?
The next couple of slides you will
Yeah.
see. So this,
Yeah.
This is a nearby meadow in bloom, a wild meadow, alpine meadow in the forest at the edge of a marsh, and so scale plays a significant role in this new show. There are really, really big paintings and there are really small paintings, and that exchange between intimacy and distance and is going to come to the fore here, I think.
Now let's see that last big image of the spread. So you've seen small there, 16 by 20. Let's see the big one. Wow, 234 inches wide. I can't wait to see this.
This is a painting that's almost 20 feet long. It's as big as the meadow. I started to think of it as a container, right? It's certainly as big as a cargo ship container, but in it I can pack all the things that interest me. There are flowers appearing really for the first time in my, well, not really for the first time, but really front and center for the first time. Flowers that are, look like Berta Morisot's or Monet's or Ellsworth Kelly's, or even Lois Dodd, my friend, who I see regularly, and she lives just down the road from the Olson house. So there are winks and nods to dozens of artists that are critical to sort of the cultivation of my artistic meadow, as it were. And then there are meadows that exist in places important to me, and in the story of my life.
Wonderful. Well, I hope all this makes the Farnsworth fans on the line feel lucky that you are already engaged with this artist. Yes, he's in many other great permanent collections. He's not yet in the collection of my home base institution, the Brandywine. So I'm putting in a pitch. I am a great fan of this, very much with us, energetically making artists who embodies some of these fascinating practices of the past and is taking them in such exciting new directions. And we should pop off of our slideshow and answer a few questions that have come in. One of which I can take. We had a question about the shift in Wyeth's palette. Before we get to some similar technical questions for you, Eric, there was a question about how Wyeth's colors shift over his lifetime. 1930s and 40s seem more colorful than his subsequent works. Does it have to do with his increased abstraction? Chicken or the egg? To talk about eggs yet again here. We hear a lot in Wyeth world about a so-called blue sky period, right. An early period where he was unapologetically devoted to Winslow Homer, that he later kind of disowned and rejected and was a little embarrassed about, that he had been so lushly beautiful, and he chose to limit his materials somewhat later. There is, as a footnote to that, a return to some bright color at the very end. So I don't think it is because of this embrace of abstraction that he gets to have a more limited palette, but wider currents. Now the questions for you, Eric, I might ask them in one breath because they relate. Suzanne Carmichael asks, how has your palette changed and why colors used? We've heard a bit about that with Wyeth. The related but distinct question, David Hunter is fascinated by how lusciously wet and oily the paint looks in Ice Cut Violet Kennebec in particular. And so people would love to hear a little bit about how you achieve these effects.
Well, everything's a choice, right? And sometimes the choices don't work, and sometimes the choices don't work, and they reveal accidents or missteps that you can really, really learn from. In my case, the medium I've chose to use for my painting has evolved just slightly over the years. I've wanted the paint to have a material presence to it. I wanted it to sit above and on and above the canvas rather than soaking into it, rather than to be flat. I wanted it to have a material presence like the Rembrandts that we mentioned. It's really, in fact, opposite of Wyeth's material wishes, right? Wyeth's material sits is very thin and sometimes absorbs into the ground. I wanted my medium to project the color in the paint and kind of stand as a surrogate to a human presence. So the materiality of the painting would represent, you know, the sort of fleshiness of humanity.
Wonderful. I think we should probably wrap there. We've gone a bit over time. Thank you all for joining us for this program of the Farnsworth Art Museum. We hope that you will get to come to the museum this summer to see Eric Aho's work for yourself in dialogue with his honored forebear, Marcin Hartley, in dialogue also with the artist he has helped us to see in a new light, Andrew Wyeth, in Abstract Flash Unseen, Andrew Wyeth on view through September 8th. Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing your insights with us. We'll look forward to seeing the Wild Meadow series down the road. Thank you all.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Wonderful to spend part of the day with you.
Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time, either digitally or hopefully in person soon over the summer. So come on by to Maine. It's sunny, I promise.
Thank you. Bye-bye.